1103. As in so many problems of canon law, the treatment of force and fear in the law of the Church depends to some extent upon Roman law for its origin. As will be noted in the later chapters, as I dealt in the thesis, the very definitions of force and fear as introduced into canon law and still in use among canonists were borrowed from Roman law sources. However, there is a peculiar note in regard to Roman law as a foundation for canonical discussions on force and fear in penal matters. The two terms, force and fear, are closely connected, so much so that one is sometimes used for the other or both are used together, since an action resulting from them has the element of lack of volition and the passive subject of the force and fear. In this thesis, Force and Fear, the canonical invalidity of marriage, I made an attempt to develop from the three perspectives. Therefore, is divided into three chapters. In the first chapter, I had given the definition and clarification to the important terms, notions, and I tried to focus on their significances. The key terms of the Canon 1103 are force and fear. Along with these terms, the other important and pertinent concepts like reverential fear, the matrimonial consent, human freedom, and the concept of simulation are dealt briefly. Connected to force and fear, on Canon 125 tells that when in placing a juridic act, someone is compelled by force to the extent that the will is totally absent because the resistance is not possible. That act is not a human act. In contrast to the direct force, fear is one of many possible reasons for placing a juridic act. Therefore, an act placed under fear is valid but questionable. In the second chapter, I dealt with the historical background of force and fear, starting from the Roman law till the present code CIC 83. How this force and fear had been instrumental for the invalidity of marriage in the respective periods. The canonists of the Middle Ages attributed a special authority to Roman law in the matter of fear and force. It was in complete independence of its treatment of marriage that Roman law enunciated the principles on force and fear that were later to be adopted by the canonists. And later origin in the Decretum Gratiani, there are various references to the particular councils which condemn the grave abuses of the kings who are forcing the young girls and widows into marriage. In order to safeguard matrimonial liberty, the decretals ruled against the use of coercion in marriage. The whole tenor of St. Thomas' teaching indicated that the use of grave fear to effect marriage was highly undesirable, but that if such fear was to invalidate marriage, this determination had to derive from the positive law. The Council of Trent, not departing from the traditional normative, passed two decrees regarding coercion of marriage. The first dealt with the impediment of abduction of the woman, and the second dealt with the abuse of temporal lords and magistrates who violated the rights of their subjects in forcing them to marry against their will. And thus a detailed analysis was given regarding the various sources of proof for and against the fact of force and fear as being involved in a given marriage. And in the third chapter, I had highlighted how it is canonically invalid, its various juridical requirements, elements, and so on. Following this centuries-old canonical tradition, the legislator does not admit the validity of a marriage entered into through force and fear due to physical or moral coercion by a third party with the consent of at least one of the parties. Force and fear in canonical marriage legislation points to the reality that there is either the total absence of the will or something else acted upon the person to influence the will to give consent to enter a certain marriage. Here the consent either does not exist at all or is a weak one, made so because of the detail of absolute and fundamental human freedom. Freedom of its very nature is always something internal to the person. Freedom is divided into freedom from within, consisting in the capacity of election, particularly election between good and evil, and freedom from without, consisting in not being impeded or forced by an outside agent in the act of choice of agent. In this connection, when we speak about the simulation of the matrimonial consent, it is divided into total and partial. Canon 1103 by the legislator is such that whenever the factors enumerated are verified in fact, the act of matrimonial consent becomes de facto and ipso facto ineffective to produce the juridical effects that would ordinarily follow from a valid consent. Although in the external forum, the invalidity of the contract will not be recognized until it has been so declared by due process of law. The marriage is nonetheless null and void from the very beginning. Thank you.